My name is Brithney Cassel, and this is not the life I imagined for myself. For 25 years, I built a life with my husband, shared dreams, shared memories, and shared trust. It wasn't for convenience or obligation, just love. But the trust I gave wasn't enough. Every spring, he packed his bags, kissed me goodbye, and vanished for a month. Always the same vague excuse. Work's busy, I'll call when I can. And just like that, he disappeared, leaving me behind with unanswered questions and a gnawing sense of unease. There were no real answers, no heartfelt explanations. Just a practiced smile and a steady flow of silence that left my pride bruised and my heart restless. I busied myself with home and friends, convincing myself it was normal, that I shouldn't pry. A quiet life, I thought. Stability, I hoped, but suspicion has a way of lingering. The discovery came on an ordinary afternoon. I was organizing the storage room when my hands brushed against an old leather-bound album. Its worn edges and hidden place made me curious. But the moment I opened it, my breath caught. Picture after picture of Daniel with a woman I didn't recognize. Smiling, holding hands, their faces alive with intimacy I hadn't seen in years. Page after page told me what words never could. Anger surged, stewing with the bitterness of his deceit. No more blind acceptance, no more ignored instincts. This story was getting a rewrite. Drop your city below, we want to see how far this story has reached. I am not defined by anyone's narrative but my own. At 55, I carry myself with a grace and strength that only comes from a lifetime of battles fought and lessons learned. I am a woman of complexity, soft but never weak, kind but not naive. My story is not one of victimhood, but of reclamation, a journey to reclaim my voice, my freedom, and the life I deserve. Whether it's handling the smallest details in my home or facing the challenges that life throws my way, I do it with quiet confidence, dignity, and determination. Beneath my composed exterior lies a furia deep, unyielding drive to seek truth, justice, and happiness on my own terms. I am curious, intuitive, and fiercely independent. The world may have tried to tell me who I should be, but I've written my own script, and every chapter is uniquely mine. The air in the house was stifling as Damon stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The sound echoed through the quiet rooms, leaving me frozen in place. For years I had trusted him, had built a life around the quiet understanding of companionship. But now, the weight of betrayal clung to me, pressing down on my chest with every passing second. The photo album lay abandoned on the table, its pages filled with 25 years of deception of Damon and Alice, their lives intertwined, their memories hidden from me. That night, Damon returned home late. I heard his footsteps in the entryway, the soft creak of his shoes against the wooden floor. He paused at the kitchen door, where I was seated at the dining table, the untouched photo album still lying open before me. He didn't speak, his expression tense, his anger barely concealed. The silence stretched between us like an unbridgeable chasm. Finally, I looked up, meeting his gaze. Why? My voice was quiet, steady, but the weight of the question hung heavily in the air. He frowned, his jaw tightening. I told you, it's nothing. You're reading too much into this, Brithney. I scoffed, leaning back in my chair. Reading too much into what? 25 years of lies? Damon, I saw the pictures. I read your notes. Don't insult my intelligence. His eyes narrowed, his composure slipping. Alice and I were friends, that's all. You think I'd waste time defending myself over something so trivial? I pushed the album toward him, flipping to the page where he and Alice stood before the waterfall, their fingers interlocked. Trivial? Is this trivial, Damon? 25 years of secret trips, hidden memories, handwritten poetry trivial? He stared at the photo, his expression unreadable, before snatching the album and closing it sharply. You had no right to go through my things, Brithney. And you had no right to betray me. I shot back, my voice rising despite myself. Do you even understand what you've done? You took vows, Damon, you made promises, and for 25 years you've been breaking them piece by piece. His anger flared, his voice sharp. We were happy, weren't we? Wasn't our life enough for you? Did you really have to go digging for things that don't matter anymore? I stood, my hands trembling, but my resolve unshaken. Don't matter anymore? Damon, they've mattered for 25 years. While you were off gallivanting with Alice, I was here holding everything together, believing in you, trusting you. He shook his head, pacing the room. You're blowing this out of proportion, Brithney. Alice was my past, not my future. You were my future, my choice. Doesn't that mean anything to you? I let out a bitter laugh, the sound cutting through the tension. Your choice? Damon, you didn't choose me. You settled for me. And every year, you reminded me of that, reminded yourself of what you thought you missed out on. The words seemed to strike something deep within him. He stopped, turning to face me fully, his expression softening for the first time. Brithney, it wasn't like that. I never... But I cut him off, my voice steady. Don't try to rationalize this to me. You knew exactly what you were doing, Damon. And now, you need to figure out how to fix it. I didn't give him a chance to respond. Turning on my heel, I left the kitchen, the sound of my footsteps echoing behind me. In that moment, I felt the fire of anger burn away the last remnants of trust I had held on to. Damon might have been the man I built my life with, but he was no longer the man I knew. The next morning, the silence in the house was deafening. Damon sat at his desk, his face drawn, his posture stiff. I didn't speak to him, didn't acknowledge his presence. Instead, I packed a bag and left. If he wanted to fight for this marriage, he'd have to start by proving he was worth it. As I walked out the door, the weight on my shoulders lifted, replaced by something I hadn't felt in years' freedom. Damon's lies had bound me for decades, but now I was determined to rewrite my story. Brithney Cassel wasn't going to be a footnote in someone else's life. She was going to take control of her own. Alice sat across from me, every inch of her exuding the composure and grace of a woman accustomed to getting what she wanted. Her dress, perfectly tailored, whispered of quiet sophistication. She smiled softly, the kind of smile that concealed as much as it revealed, as though she held every card in this unspoken game between us. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us hung heavy, charged with tension. She was the intruder in my home, the shadow that had loomed over my marriage for decades. And yet here she was, sipping the tea I had served her, as though she belonged. Her voice was calm, almost soothing, as she broke the silence. Thank you for seeing me, Brithney. I know this must be uncomfortable. I raised an eyebrow, my tone sharp but measured. Uncomfortable doesn't quite cover it, Alice. I'm curious what exactly brings you to my door. She set her teacup down with deliberate care, folding her hands neatly in her lap. Damon, he's been distracted lately. I thought perhaps you and I could have a candid conversation about it. My laugh was bitter, the sound cutting through her practiced serenity. Distracted? Is that what you call it? Because I have another word. Deceit. Her expression didn't falter, but a flicker of something guilt perhaps passed through her eyes. I never meant to come between the two of you, she began, her tone soft, almost apologetic. Oh, spare me, I snapped, leaning forward. You didn't come between us, Alice. You've been standing in the middle of my marriage for 25 years. Don't pretend this is anything but exactly what you wanted. She opened her mouth to respond, but I didn't give her the chance. My voice rose, sharp and unyielding. Do you have any idea what it feels like to give your entire life to someone only to find out they've been splitting their world in two? To wake up one day and realize that every moment you thought was yours was shared with someone else? Her composure cracked, just slightly. She looked down at her hands, her voice barely above a whisper. It was never about hurting you, Brithney. Damon and we shared something that was difficult to let go of. But that doesn't mean he doesn't love you. I stood, the chair scraping against the floor as I pushed it back. Love? Don't talk to me about love, Alice. Love isn't lying. Love isn't sneaking around for decades. Whatever it is you think you have with Damon, it's built on betrayal. She stood as well, her calm facade fully shattered. You think this has been easy for me? You think I haven't felt guilt? I gave up everything for him once, and he came back to you. Do you know what that's like? The room fell silent, the weight of her words hanging between us. For the first time, I saw her not as the villain of my story, but as someone who had been trapped in her own illusion, her own false hope. But that didn't change the fact that she had willingly played her part in the deception. I met her gaze, my voice firm but steady. Whatever your reasons, whatever your feelings, this ends now. Damon made his choice, and so did I. You don't get to waltz into my life and dictate how this story goes. Her lips parted as if to argue, but I held up a hand, silencing her. I'm done being the supporting character in someone else's drama. If Damon means so much to you, then by all means, take him. But don't expect me to stand by and watch while you both pick at the pieces of what's left of my life. She stared at me for a long moment, as if trying to find the right words. But when none came, she simply picked up her bag and walked to the door. She paused briefly, looking back at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Goodbye, Brithney, she said softly, before stepping out into the sunlight and disappearing from view. As the door clicked shut, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. The storm that had consumed my life for so long was finally clearing. I had faced Alice, faced the truth, and emerged with my dignity intact. Alice moved into Damon's house not long after I left, stepping into the role she had pursued for decades. At first, their life seemed picture perfect. Damon, finally reunited with his so-called true love, was praised for his enduring romance. Lucas adored Alice's elegance and well-mannered nature, happily showering her with compliments. Even little Neil was won over, calling her grandma in his sweet, innocent voice. But behind the facade of their idyllic life, the cracks began to show. Alice was accustomed to being pampered, to having everything handed to her. Managing a household was entirely foreign to her, and the reality of day-to-day life began to weigh heavily. The meals she attempted were bland at best, inedible at worst. Damon, who had never lifted a finger in the kitchen while we were married, was quickly growing frustrated with her lack of effort. I heard about it all through Zoe, my ever-reliable community gossip. "You won't believe this," she said during one of her frequent calls, laughter bubbling through the phone. "Alice apparently burned dinner twice last week. Damon actually tried cooking himself, and let's just say it didn't go well. Imagine that Mr. Perfection reduced to eating takeout." I couldn't help but smile at the irony. Damon had chosen Alice, the woman he had idealized for decades, only to realize that fantasies rarely survive reality. Then, of course, there were the financial matters. Damon's income, while significant during our marriage, was far less impressive now that retirement loomed. I had taken my share of the marital assets fairly. I minded leaving him with enough to live comfortably but not lavishly. Alice, however, was used to luxury. She expected fine dining, frequent vacations, and a lifestyle Damon simply couldn't sustain. As the money dwindled, so did her patience. She began to complain, her once soothing voice now sharp with dissatisfaction. One evening, Zoe called with yet another update. "Guess what? Damon and Alice had a huge fight the other night. She wants to go to Italy, but he told her they can't afford it." Apparently, she stormed out and spent the night at a hotel. Can you believe it? I chuckled, shaking my head. Sounds like the honeymoon phase didn't last long. And then there was Lucas. He had been so eager to embrace Alice, so quick to dismiss me, and praise his father's true love. But even he began to see the cracks. Zoe reported on his growing frustration. "Lucas has been venting to anyone who'll listen. He's upset that Alice isn't helping out with Neil as much as he hoped. She spends more time at the spa than at home. Poor Kitty thought she'd be a replacement for you, but now he's realizing what he lost." I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The truth was revealing itself, piece by piece, and I had no intention of involving myself in their unraveling lives. A few months later, the breaking point came. Zoe's voice crackled with excitement during yet another call. "Brithney, you are going to love this. Alice left Damon, packed her bags, and walked out. Apparently, she said something about not signing up to be a housemaid. Can you believe the nerve?" I could. Alice had chased a dream for decades, only to realize it wasn't what she wanted after all. And Damon? He was left alone, his perfect image of love shattered. Meanwhile, I thrived. My days were filled with peace, joy, and new experiences. I took pottery classes, traveled to places I'd only dreamed of, and spent time with people who valued me for who I was, not for what I could do for them. I was no longer a supporting character in someone else's story. I was the lead in my own. And as for Damon, he remained a shadow in the background, a man who had spent his life chasing a dream, only to lose everything that truly mattered. Lucas's voice trembled as it came through the phone, pleading, nearly breaking under the weight of desperation. "Mom," Dad collapsed after a huge fight with Alice. "He's in the hospital. He can't move. Mom, please, just pity him. You were married for 40 years. Can you at least come see him?" I sat in silence, gripping the phone tightly. The same son who had dismissed me, belittled me, and sided with Damon now begged for my presence. For a moment, the sheer irony almost made me laugh. Pity? For Damon? The man who had spent decades lying to me? Still, there was something about Lucas's tone that held me back from snapping. Instead, I took a deep breath and answered him plainly. "Lucas, your father made his choices, and now he's living with the consequences. Why don't you ask Alice to go to the hospital? She's the one who wanted this life with him." There was a long silence on the other end of the line before Lucas finally responded, his voice subdued. "Alice. Alice hasn't been around much lately. She's been distant since Dad got sick." I let the words sink in. Of course, Alice was nowhere to be found. She had chased Damon for decades, but now, faced with the realities of his age and his failing health, she had no use for him. The woman who had promised him adventure and love was the same woman who abandoned him when life became inconvenient. Later that day, Monica stopped by with Neil, her voice soft as she filled me in on the situation. Alice has practically vanished, she said, shaking her head. She hasn't been to the hospital once. Lucas has been running himself ragged trying to handle everything. Neil, work, Damon, and Alice hasn't lifted a finger to help. She hesitated for a moment before continuing, her tone cautious. I think Lucas wants you to step in, Julia. He knows he messed up before, but I guess he's hoping you'll forgive him and help the family again. I looked at her, my gaze steady. Monica, I've spent enough of my life fixing other people's messes. Damon made his decisions, and now he has to live with them. I'm done sacrificing myself for people who don't respect me. She nodded slowly, understanding in her eyes. I don't blame you, Julia. Honestly, if I were you, I don't think I'd go either. Lucas needs to learn that you're not his safety net anymore. Despite my resolve, curiosity tugged at me. I couldn't help but wonder about Damon, lying in that hospital bed, surrounded by the crumbling remains of the life he had built with Alice. So, later that evening, I found myself scrolling through social media, searching for any updates. It didn't take long to find them. The internet was relentless. Damon and Alice's so-called fairy tale love story had imploded spectacularly. Photos of them together, once hailed as romantic, were now scrutinized with disgust. Comments tore them apart. 40 years of lies. How could anyone romanticize this? Alice left her husband for Damon, only to abandon him when things got tough. True love? Please. I feel bad for Damon's wife. She's the real victim in all this. The very public they had courted for admiration now turned against them, exposing the truth behind their carefully curated image. The tide had shifted, and for the first time in decades, Damon was facing the consequences of his actions. As I closed the app, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Satisfaction? Perhaps. But mostly I felt free. Free from the lies, the manipulation, the pain that had once defined my life. Damon and Alice were left to weather their own storm, while I stood untouched by the chaos, thriving in my newfound independence. Weeks passed, and the messages from Lucas continued. He begged me to visit Damon, to put aside my pride and see him one last time. But each time, I ignored him. I had no desire to see Damon in his weakened statnod out of cruelty, but because I simply didn't care anymore. Instead, I poured myself into my hobbies: piano lessons, pottery, gardening. Every day was a celebration of freedom, of the life I had reclaimed for myself. And then, one day, as I sat at the piano, the sunlight streaming through the window, I realized something. Damon's story was over. His betrayals, his lies, his downfall, it was all in the past. And I was the woman who had risen above it all, stronger and more alive than ever before. Brithney Cassel was no longer the wife standing in the shadows. She was the woman who had walked away, leaving behind the wreckage, and now stood in the light hole, free and unapologetically herself. The sun filtered through the blinds, casting long stripes of light across my living room floor as I sat with a steaming cup of tea, the familiar scent of chamomile calming my nerves. For the first time in a long time, the house felt peaceful, silent, but not empty. Lucas hadn't called in days, and Monica hadn't stopped by with yet another update about Damon's unraveling life. The quiet was blissful, a soft reminder that I had finally reclaimed my space and my time. And yet, my mind wandered. Not with regret, no. Those emotions had been left behind like discarded baggage, but with curiosity. How far had Damon fallen since Alice's betrayal? How much of the life he'd built had crumbled? It wasn't out of malice. Perhaps it was simply human nature to wonder. The calm was short-lived. My doorbell rang, shattering the stillness. When I opened it, Monica stood there, Neil clutching her hand, his backpack slung over his tiny shoulders. Her face was pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Julia, can I come in?" she asked, her voice tight with restrained frustration. I stepped aside, gesturing for her to enter. Neil dashed into the living room, quickly finding his place on the couch with a coloring book. Monica waited until he was out of earshot before she turned to me, her arms crossed. "Lucas didn't want me to tell you this," she began, her tone low and controlled. "But I couldn't keep it to myself. Damon's condition has worsened. He's not doing well, Julia." I raised an eyebrow, my expression calm. "And what exactly do you expect me to do about that, Monica?" Her shoulders sagged slightly, but her eyes held a flicker of determination. I know what he did to you. I know how much he hurt you. But Lucas is struggling. He's trying to take care of Damon and Neil, and it's too much for him. Can't you just... I held up a hand, cutting her off gently but firmly. Monica, I'm sorry Lucas is struggling, but Damon is his father. He wasn't my responsibility then, and he certainly isn't now. Monica's lips parted as if to argue, but the fire in her gaze faltered. She sighed, sitting down at the kitchen table. You're right, she admitted quietly. I don't blame you for stepping back, but I needed to try. Her sincerity disarmed me, but it didn't change my resolve. I sat across from her, pouring her a cup of tea. You did what you thought was right. I can't fault you for that. We sipped our tea in silence, the tension between us easing. Whatever her intentions had been, I could see she wasn't here to demand anything of me, and for that, I was grateful. As Monica left with Neil, I watched them walk down the street, her hand protectively resting on his shoulder. I admired her strength, her resilience. She was doing what Lucas refused, to choosing her battles wisely, protecting her peace while still keeping her family intact. Hours later, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world in hues of amber and pink, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was a video message from Zoe, my ever-reliable source of updates. With a wry smile, I opened it. The video showed Damon in the hospital, his face pale and gaunt, a shadow of the man I had known. His once sharp, authoritative tone had been replaced by a soft, almost desperate plea. I know I made mistakes, he said, his voice trembling slightly. And I know I hurt people I cared about, but I've learned from it. I just want to make amends before it's too late. The message cut to Lucas, standing awkwardly at Damon's bedside, trying to put on a brave face. His usual confidence was gone, replaced by uncertainty and frustration. Zoe's voice came through as the video ended. I thought you'd want to see this. Seems like the mighty Damon has finally been humbled. Honestly, Julia, you're better off, but I figured you should know. I set the phone down, exhaling slowly. Damon's words carried no weight with me anymore. His pleas for redemption, his attempts to rewrite his story, they weren't for me. They were for himself, an attempt to soothe his own conscience, to erase decades of selfishness, and I wouldn't play a part in it. The following days passed in quiet contentment. I threw myself into my piano lessons, delighting in the progress I made. The simple act of playing, of creating something beautiful with my own hands, brought me a joy that had been missing for far too long. My home was filled with music, laughter from visits with new friends, and the steady hum of a life well lived. And as for Damon, his story continued without me, his world unraveling in ways I no longer cared to follow. The legacy he left behind was his to bear an empire built on deceit and crumbling under its own weight. As I sat by the piano in my living room, the early morning light streaming through the windows, I felt a wave of calm wash over me. My fingers rested lightly on the keys, the quiet hum of the city outside filling the silence. Yet behind that calm, behind the stillness of my surroundings, my thoughts churned relentlessly. What was I supposed to feel? Relief? Satisfaction? Anger? In truth, I felt a mix of it all, a complex, swirling storm of emotions that I couldn't quite name. Damon's downfall, Alice's departure, Lucas's futile pleasant was as though the life I had lived for so many years was unraveling before me, piece by piece. But for once, I wasn't the one holding it together. I had spent decades tied to Damon's story, pouring my strength into a marriage that had been half real and half lie. And now that it was all behind me, now that I had walked away and reclaimed my life, the emotions I carried were bittersweet. It wasn't joy or triumph that filled me, it was a quiet sense of justice. Damon and Alice had built their lives on betrayal and deceit, and now they were facing the consequences. And as much as a part of me wanted to feel vindicated, another part of me simply felt exhausted. Years of sacrifice had hardened me, but they had also left scars. Even as I enjoyed my freedom, even as I explored hobbies, traveled, and built a new life for myself, there were moments when the past crept in, moments when the weight of what I had endured felt heavier than ever. There were nights when I would wake in the darkness, my mind drifting to the image of Damon in his hospital bed, frail and defeated. His trembling voice pleading with me, his eyes filled with regret. It was a haunting picture. But it wasn't pity I felt for him, it was detachment. His regrets weren't mine to bear. His mistakes weren't mine to fix. And yet, I couldn't help but wonder, did he ever truly understand the depth of the pain he caused me? Or was he too consumed by his own downfall to see beyond himself? And then there was Lucas. My son, Once the child who had clung to me with unconditional love, was now a man who barely recognized my worth. His loyalty to Damon, his blind praise for Alicite, had cut deeper than I ever admitted. But even as he tried to mend the rift between us, his words carried the same selfishness, the same disregard for everything I had given to him and his family. How ironic that the son who dismissed me for decades was now the one begging for my help. Still, amid the bitterness and the echoes of betrayal, I felt something else, something quiet, something comforting. Pride. Pride in the woman I had become, in the strength I had found. I had survived Damon's lies, Alice's cruelty, Lucas's dismissiveness. I had walked away from a life that had tried to suffocate me, and I had emerged whole. The bruises were there, yes, but so was the resilience. And that resilience fueled me, reminded me that I was no longer the woman who lived in the shadows of others. I was Brithney Cassel, woman of strength, of dignity, of independence. The piano beneath my fingers felt cool, smooth. I pressed a single key, letting the note hang in the air. It was a simple sound, yet it carried meaning, my determination to move forward, to create something beautiful out of the chaos I had left behind. Music had become my solace, my escape, a way to channel the emotions that sometimes felt too heavy to carry. Each chord I played was a reminder that I could build something new, something entirely mine. And it wasn't just music. My travels, my interactions with new people, my quiet moments of reflection of it had become part of the life I was reclaiming. Each experience was a step away from the past, a step toward the future I was carving out for myself. As the weeks passed, I found that the bitterness began to fade, replaced by a sense of peace. Not forgiveness, no. Damon and Alice hadn't earned that, but acceptance. Acceptance of what had happened, of what I had endured, of the fact that the world keeps turning even after the most painful chapters of our lives. There was a strange comfort in that realization, a reminder that I wasn't defined by their actions or their choices. I was defined by my own. My heart still carried the weight of those years, but it also carried hope. Hope for the years ahead, for the adventures still waiting to be had, for the friendships and joys that I was only beginning to discover. Damon's story was over, Alice's chapter closed, Lucas's pleas unanswered. But my story, it was just beginning. The day had started off as peacefully as ever. The warm sun bathed the streets in a gentle glow, and the scent of spring lingered in the air. I had been heading home from my piano lesson, a small smile tugging at my lips as I hummed a melody under my breath. On a whim, I decided to treat myself to a bouquet of fresh flowers to brighten up my living room. It seemed like the perfect way to end the morning. As I approached the corner flower stall, the vibrant colors of roses, tulips, and daisies caught my eye. The stall belonged to an older woman named Clara, someone I'd seen countless times during my walks but had never spoken to directly. She had an air of sternness about her, a woman weathered by years of hard work, her hands calloused from handling flowers and tending to her little shop. Yet today, there was a tension in her posture, her lips pressed into a thin line as she arranged a row of lilies. I scanned the arrangements, my gaze settling on a bunch of soft pink peonies. They were beautiful, their petals delicate and full, just the kind of flowers to liven up my home. "Good morning," I greeted warmly, pointing to the peonies. "How much for these?" Clara barely looked up, her response clipped. "Those are 500 hivnias." I paused, raising an eyebrow. The price seemed unusually steep for peonies, even ones this fresh. 500? I repeated, my tone light but questioning. "That seems a bit high, don't you think?" She straightened her back, fixing me with a sharp gaze. "Fresh peonies aren't cheap. If you don't want them, someone else will." Her tone was brisk, almost defensive, and it caught me off guard. I wasn't trying to argue, just negotiate. Still, something about her demeanor struck a nerve. "I'm not saying they're not beautiful," I replied evenly, "but I've bought peonies plenty of times, and they're rarely priced this high. Is there a reason for the increase?" Clara let out a huff, crossing her arms over her apron. "The price is the price. If you can't afford it, move along." Her words stung, not because of the implication, but because of the sheer audacity. I felt a spark of indignation flare up inside me. I hadn't expected to be brushed off so rudely over something as simple as flowers. "It's not about affording it," I said, my voice cool but firm. "It's about fairness. I've supported local sellers like you my entire life, so forgive me for asking a simple question." The tension between us was palpable now, drawing the attention of a few passers-by who slowed their steps, curious about the commotion. Clara's expression hardened, and for a moment, I wondered if this was going to escalate further. Fairness? She snapped. Do you have any idea how much work goes into keeping these flowers fresh? How much it costs to maintain this stall? You think it's easy? Her words hung in the air, and I could feel her frustration pouring out not just about the flowers, but about everything that had likely weighed on her shoulders over the years. For a moment, I hesitated, my indignation giving way to understanding. But I wasn't about to back down. Calmly, I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. Let's settle this, I said, opening a browser and quickly searching for local market prices for peonies. Within moments, I found a listing from a nearby flower shop showing the same flowers priced at half of what Clara was asking. I turned the screen toward her, my tone measured. I understand that running a business isn't easy, but overcharging customers doesn't help either. If your prices are twice the market rate, people will stop buying from you. Clara stared at the screen, her lips pressing into an even thinner line. For a moment, she looked almost deflated, as though the fight had gone out of her. Then, with a reluctant sigh, she muttered, "Fine, 300. I smiled softly, sensing the shift in her tone. "Thank you," I said, pulling out my wallet and handing her the money. But as she wrapped the flowers in crisp brown paper, I hesitated. "Clara," I said gently, "I wasn't trying to argue with you. I just wanted to understand. If there's ever a reason your prices go up, it's okay to explain that. People like me are customers, we want to support you, but it's hard to do that when you push us away." Her hands froze for a moment as she tied the string around the bouquet. When she looked up at me, her expression had softened, the hard edges giving way to something quieter, almost vulnerable. I've had a rough morning," she admitted, her voice low, "and sometimes it feels like people don't understand how hard this is." I reached out, resting a hand lightly on the counter. "I do understand," I said sincerely. "Life isn't easy for any of us, but kindness goes a long way, and you sell the most beautiful flowers here. Don't let frustration take that away from you." Clara nodded slowly, a small, almost hesitant smile tugging at her lips. "You're right. I shouldn't have snapped at you. I'm sorry." I smiled back, taking the bouquet she handed me. "Apology accepted. And for what it's worth, these really are the prettiest peonies I've seen in a long time." She chuckled softly, the tension between us dissolving. "Enjoy them, Julia, and thank you." As I stood at the edge of the Seine River, the Eiffel Tower towering above me, glimmering in the evening light, I felt the full weight of my liberation. Paris had always been a place I had dreamed of, visiting an untouched dream, buried beneath the decades of responsibilities and heartbreak that had once defined my life. Now, the dream was mine, no longer tethered to anyone else's expectations or deceptions. I pulled my scarf tighter against the breeze, gazing at the beauty of the city, its lights flickering like stars brought down to earth. Somewhere in my bag, my phone buzzed with another message, likely Lucas with yet another plea or update about Damon. But I didn't reach for it. I didn't need to hear more. Damon's life was behind me, just like the years I had spent sacrificing for him. It wasn't long ago that I had seen him lying frail in his hospital bed, his once sharp eyes dimmed by age and regret. His trembling voice had pleaded with me for forgiveness, for reconciliation, for a return to the life we had shared. "Julia," he had said, coughing weakly, "if I had just chosen you, if I'd stayed that day, do you think we'd still be together now?" I had stared at him, the man who had once seemed larger than life, now reduced to nothing but his own hollow regrets. My voice was steady, unwavering. "No, Damon, you wouldn't have changed. Fickleness is in your nature. If you'd truly loved me, you wouldn't have spent decades chasing after Alice." His breath had hitched, his face twisting with pain not from his failing health, but from the weight of my words. "But we spent 40 years together, Julia. Doesn't that mean anything? Can't we go back?" I had smiled then, a smile tinged with quiet finality. "Damon, can you give me back those 40 years? Can you undo the betrayal? Why should I cherish a marriage built on lies?" His laugh had been bitter, his voice barely above a whisper. I spent my life healing others, but I couldn't even save myself. Those final moments had been enough for me. As I walked away from his hospital room, past Lucas and Monica, who waited outside with expressions of concern and pity, I felt the weight on my shoulders lift. For the first time in decades, I could breathe freely, unburdened by the lies, the manipulations, the years wasted on someone who had never truly valued me. And then, there was Alice. She had come to me, desperate and defeated, her once polished demeanor now overshadowed by despair. "You won, Julia," she had said, her hands trembling as she pushed a cup of coffee toward me. I thought I had his love, but I was wrong. I lost. I'm leaving. I had watched her silently, sipping my coffee, offering no sympathy for the woman who had been complicit in the destruction of my marriage. Do you know why Damon and I fought? She had continued, her voice shaking. The internet tore me apart, calling me shameless, a fool who spent her life as the other woman. I begged him to post a statement online to say that your marriage ended 25 years ago. Just one sentence, that's all it would have taken to clear my name, but he refused. He would rather let himself be ruined than admit the truth. He would rather see me dragged through the mud than tell the world that you weren't his wife when we were together. Her bitterness had been palpable, her anger cutting through her composed facade. But I had offered her nothing. No comfort, no agreement, no vindication. There's no winning or losing here, I had said quietly. You lost your love. I lost my life. And now, I was here, standing at the heart of Paris, the city of light and love, where the past seemed like nothing more than a distant dream. Damon was just a ghost now, haunting his own regrets. Alice had faded away, consumed by the consequences of her choices. As for me, I had begun anew. At 60, I was thriving, learning, traveling, rediscovering the world and myself. The years I had lost were gone, yes, but the years ahead were mine. A young woman passed by, smiling warmly at me. Bonsoir, madame, she greeted. I returned the smile, my heart swelling with quiet joy. I was Brithney Cassel, and even at 60, I had proven to myself and to the world that it was never too late to begin again.